Part 4. As the last remnants of the day's heat began to give way to the night's freezing cold, Valden was thankful for the heat provided by their fire. Of course it was Sylvie who'd built the fire in the first place, but he didn't see any reason to thank her for something he could have done himself. Sure, his fire would just consist of dead twigs and leaves instead of an entire tree trunk, but that wasn't the point. After several days of traveling, the two of them had left the realm of Vandan and were back in the surrounding lands where everything was human size. They hadn't met many humans yet, though, because they were journeying through the inhospitable mountain region that lay east of their homeland. Here it was always cold, always snowing, and the steep climbs made Sylvie complain to no end. Valden didn't care, though. He wanted to see what lay beyond the mountains. And if it made his bratty sister complain, well, that was a plus. While the enormous fire blazed brightly, Valden waited for Sylvie to return from her hunting trip. She never took very long, and tonight she'd managed to capture 3 very large black bears, enough for a nice supper to herself, and some sort of pheasant or ptarmigan-like bird for Valden. She had brought her own provisions along, carrying them in her rucksack, but she didn't want to use them when there was food available here. She scrapped out a few coals for Valden to cook his food on, and soon afterwards they were eating their first supper, away from the comfort environment of their own land. "This is just perfect," Sylvie remarked as she struggled to chew the unsavory bear meat. "I mean, could this waste of a trip get any worse? Valden, I swear, if you don't get us somewhere nice and warm soon, I'm going to— Oh, shut up. Just leave me and go back if you don't like it here. Then I won't have to listen to your whining." She gave him such a glare that he almost was certain she was about to physically injure him. But she ate on in silence, leaving him to wonder if she was going to pay him back for that sometime. Eventually the flames died down and the embers began to die, and the two of them had to find somewhere to sleep. For Sylvie, this was no problem. Already wearing a warm fur coat, gloves, and trousers, she had also brought a thick blanket along and could use her own rucksack as a pillow. Her large body size kept her from losing heat as well. But for Valden, this was a problem, even though he was just as warmly dressed. He unrolled his mattress as far from his sister as possible, making her snicker in amusement. "You're not really going to sleep over there all alone, are you?" she said. "What if another bear comes for a visit?" "I'm not scared of bears," he retorted. "Besides, where else am I supposed to sleep? Next to you? Don't be an idiot." "Oh, I see. You're scared I'm going to roll over you in my sleep. Well, your tininess, looks like I'm going to have to take extra measures to keep you safe, just like Mummy said I should." She got up and crawled over to where he was lying. Valden groaned inwardly when he saw her grasping hand coming towards him. What is she going to do to him now, he wondered. He wanted to protest, but decided it was smarter to keep his mouth shut, or else she might do something even more humiliating to him. She wrapped herself up in her blanket and held her elder brother firmly between her hands. "Nothing to say, she giggled. "You finally realized Big Sister is always right, haven't you? Good. You just keep being a quiet, obedient little mouse and do what I say from now on, and we'll get along great. Now I'm going to keep you safe and close, where the big bad bears won't be able to get you. Nighty-night, little brother." Sylvie reached in underneath her coat, found it in her pocket, and tucked him snugly into it. After waiting a few minutes to make sure he wasn't trying to escape, she lay on her back, looked up at the clear, starry skies for a little while, then closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep. Despite being trapped next to his sister's body, Valden couldn't deny that it was pleasantly warm and comfortable in her pocket. He wanted nothing more than to lie down and catch some sleep, but his sense of pride was too strong. "I'm not her little puppet. She can't make my decisions for me," he insisted to himself. "If I want to sleep outside by myself without her protection, I will do it." He waited not more than 15 minutes before he began to feel her chest moving rhythmically beneath him. She had gone to sleep and could escape. He struggled to find a way out, feeling almost suffocated beneath the thick layer of fur above him, eventually emerging right beneath her neck. A fortuitous full moon meant he had plenty of light to see. Taking care not to touch her exposed skin, he clambered across her chest and lowered himself down her shoulder. Her huge childlike face overshadowed him. Her expression was calm and peaceful, and little wisps of frosty breath escaped from her nostrils and mouth every now and then. The fire had completely died out, and the cold was overwhelming. But Valden stubbornly made his way to his mattress. Suddenly, he remembered there were bears in the area, and he went and fetched his sword from his things. When he turned around, however, he froze in his tracks, and he felt a chill running through him. A shadowy shape had appeared out of nowhere. He was sure of it. About 30 yards away, there were 2 pine trees with a gap between them, through which one could see the sky. But something was standing there now. Standing absolutely still. Something big. When he moved forward a step, he could have sworn the shadow moved forward as well, for it grew a tiny bit bigger. Then he realized he was completely exposed, directly in the moonlight, and that whatever it was probably watching him, hunting him. Though he was good in a hunt, Valden had never killed anything larger than a deer before, and that shadow looked twice, maybe thrice his height. He was all of a sudden deathly afraid, and he looked longingly back at the sleeping Sylvie, whose protection he had unwisely abandoned. He began to creep slowly back towards her, keeping his eyes on the shadowy unknown beast, when, without any warning, a blood-curdling growl broke the silence. Valden dropped his sword and ran at full speed back to Sylvie, and for once, he was glad that she had awoken.
What was that? She muttered sleepily. Valden, what are you?
Something's out there, he yelled, running right up to her face.
Wake up, Sylvie, wake up! There's something there!
Sylvie was completely awake now, but rather than listen to her brother's pleas, she snatched him up and began to scold him.
So, she said snootily, little Mr. Scaredy-Cat needs my help after all. After sneaking out like a naughty boy, too. You're definitely going to get punished. Whatever. Look, we don't have time. There's a creature out there.
Where? I don't see anything.
Over there, by the trees.
Hey. It's gone. Sure enough, he could no longer see the hulking shadow. The clearing between the trees was empty again, and nothing was moving about in the moonlight. He searched in vain, but eventually had to admit defeat. Sylvie was looking really cross with him, and he tried to explain, but she silenced him with a fingertip. I really ought to teach you a lesson for running away like that, she said, but I guess whatever you saw has already done so. Next time you disobey me, I'm not going to bother helping you, understood? Now you're going to lie still in my pocket, or would you rather sleep beneath my butt?
Listen, I'm sorry, but there really was...
Oh, shut up, Valden. You don't have to tell me how scared you are of everything. Now go to sleep. She stuffed him roughly into the same pocket and lay down again. This time, it took her a little longer to fall asleep, since she was so exasperated by his behavior. Valden also struggled to drift off. He was absolutely furious at her and banged his fist against her chest beneath him, even though he knew she couldn't feel him beneath her clothing. But he stayed put this time, and at last, the two of them went to sleep. So it was that neither of them saw the massive snow troll pass them. The beast was searching for the little human it had seen running around in the moonlight, before the giantess movement had scared it away temporarily. There was no human here now, and the troll, since it was only the size of a kitten compared to Sylvie, left her alone and wandered back into the forest. 2 days later, Sylvie found herself standing on top of a high hill, looking out over a snow-covered river valley. Across the valley lay yet more hills, getting gradually higher and higher, until they came to the Cairneoin Mountains, which even she had to admit were pretty high. But she was tired of having to climb about all day while her little pest of a brother got a free ride in her pocket, tired of sleeping on cold, hard ground every night and eating whatever vile beast was easiest to catch that day. She wanted to go home and sleep in her warm bed again and take a warm bath and eat fresh bread and juicy apples at every meal. She took Valden out of her pocket, holding onto his feet, and dangled him upside down at arm's length. The slope of the hill was 200 feet below him, and he felt a sudden attack of dizziness. Above him, Sylvie's arm reached over to her distant shoulder, and she spun him around and showed him the view. "See that?" she said irritably. "More nothingness. That's all there ever is. More nothingness. That's it, Valden. Tomorrow, I'm turning around and we're going back. The two of us are going back home, and I won't hear a single word of complaining from you." "No," he began to argue, but at the moment she let go, he was falling through the air. He was so scared he couldn't even scream. But at a split second later, he fell into the soft hollow of her gloved hand. He lay gasping as she brought him higher, and watched as her face gradually filled his view. "Oops," she said, without a hint of an apology. "I almost forgot how fragile you are, baby brother. Not that I would have missed you if you fell, of course. You're so small and useless anyway. Well, I'd best start building the fire and find some food and do everything else you're too small and weak to do." Back into the pocket she put him, and there he stayed, except when she took him out for supper and toilet duties. Valden could sense that his sister's tolerance for him had reached its end, and he could say the same about himself. While Sylvie slept at night, he stayed awake, debating in his mind what he should do, going over and over each possibility. "If I stay with Sylvie, I'll always be in her shadow. She'll never let me be my own person, no matter what Mom and Dad say to her. But if I leave her now, I'll never see them again. Or Belena. But at least I'll be away from Sylvie. I can look after myself in the wild. I know I can. And as soon as I'm over these mountains, there'll be more people to meet. I can make my life there. I won't have to worry about Sylvie finding me ever again." By the time he'd reached this conclusion, the night was almost over. The sky was beginning to brighten in the east, and he carefully crept out of her pocket, just like he'd done before. He fetched his sword, but decided to leave all his other effects, since they'd only slow him down. Taking one last look at his sleeping sister, he turned and headed down into the valley. As he did, he wished Sylvie well. Though they all but hated each other, he knew she was a good person in her own way, and he didn't want anything bad to happen to her. He was running down a steep, snowy slope when all of a sudden he tripped, lost his balance, and stumbled. He began to roll down the slope, crying out in pain, until he reached the bottom and plunged into an icy cold stream. The shock nearly caused him to faint, as it was. It was several minutes before his senses came back again, and by that time the stream had grown in size and speed. Valden futilely tried to reach the riverbank, but the current was so strong and his muscles had been crippled by the intense cold water. It took all of his energy just to keep his head above water. He was about to make one final push for the shore when he saw the river coming to a sudden stop right ahead. A waterfall, he thought, and his soul sank. It can't be. But it is. Maybe Sylvie will save me? No, how could she? I left her behind, and she'll never know how her baby brother died. The cold proved too much to handle, and as he passed out, right before plunging over the 100-foot cliff in a torrent of raging drops. At the bottom of the waterfall was a large lake, and it was along its shores that two young boys were preparing to catch today's fish. They belonged to one of the many mountain tribes
about whom almost nothing was known to the more civilized people of the western lands. Still, they shared common ancestry with the men of Elgon, and their languages were strikingly similar. These two boys happened to be the sons of the chief of the nearby village. Rhett, the eldest, was 17, and his younger brother, Nut, was 12. They were both expert hunters and fishers, but something other than fish was attracting their attention that morning. They both stared at the object as it floated by, and wondered if it had come down by the waterfall. "It looks like a body," Nut exclaimed. Is it dead?" "I don't know." "No, wait, look! It's moving an arm! Quick, give me the net!" Rhett took the net by one end and tossed the other end as far as it could into the water. The floating body's arm got entangled in the cords, and the two boys pulled with all their strength. They were surprised to see that it was another boy, about the same age as Rhett. He was dressed in fur clothes like they were, though his were considerably finer looking, and he had a sword attached to his belt. They dragged him onto the shore and tried to revive him, but got only a few faint signs of life. "Almost dead," Nut whispered. "What do we do?" "I guess we take him back to the village. Maybe a warm fire will help him. Or some food." "But where does he come from? There aren't no villages upstream. He doesn't look like one of us anyhow." "Don't know. Maybe if we can wake him up, he'll tell us." They half-dragged, half-carried the unconscious Valden back to their village, hoping it wasn't too late to save him from death. "Harder," Belena called out, pressing her foot downwards a bit. "Rub harder, little man. I can barely even feel you." It took a few more prods before her captive complied. She felt him rubbing his entire body against the sole of her bare foot. She lay back against her pillows, popped another strawberry into her mouth, and gave a weary sigh. Disciplining Argo had been harder than she'd expected. At first, she'd made him carry small articles of hers across the room. Small on her scale, of course. But once these became too heavy for him to carry, the foreign prince had simply declined to carry on, and he began to speak rudely to her again. In desperation, Belena had taken off her shoes, lay down on her bed, and told him to start massaging her feet and toes. When he disobeyed, she'd press down on him with her soul, just enough to make him extremely uncomfortable, then repeated her instructions. This time he obeyed. To add to his humiliation, she'd also told him to take off his expensive clothing, leaving on only his undergarments. This he flatly refused to do so she had to do it for him, undressing him like a doll. The nasty curses he yelled at her were quite shocking for her to hear, but she remained convinced she could turn him into a well-behaved little gentleman by the end of the day. "Oh, that feels wonderful. Keep on doing what you're doing now, and I might just reward you, my little prince." With her gargantuan foot looming above him, ready to crush him if he misspoke again, Argo kept his thoughts to himself. The skin beneath her feet was actually quite smooth, and rubbing his bare body against it was almost pleasant. But that didn't matter one bit to him. She was going to pay for this, he promised himself. He would see to that, and nothing and no one would stop him from killing this insolent giant girl in the most brutal, terrible way he could think of. Belena had had enough fun for the moment, and she lifted her foot up. She then caught Argo between her two big toes, and with a little jerk, flung him forward towards her head. He landed on the soft contours of her bosom, bounced once, and rolled down her chest into the hollow of her neck. She laughed as she picked him up with ease. He might be a giant among men, but in the delicate grip of her fingers, he was pitifully pathetic. She took another strawberry and held it next to him, just out of his reach. He looked at the juicy-looking 4-foot-long strawberry with longing. "Oh, are you hungry?" she teased him. "You do look hungry, but I'm not so sure you really deserve this." After all, you did say some rather nasty things to me not so long ago. So let's try again. Say you're sorry, beg for me to forgive you, and ask me nicely and politely, and I'll let you have this strawberry. I might even consider letting you go." She winked and smiled at him so sweetly that it was too much for Argo to take. He was about to explode in a fit of rage and tell her exactly what he thought of her when the bedroom door opened. Belena sat upright with a shock and dropped the tiny prince into her lap. Into her chamber strode a very angry-looking Queen Valerie. "Where is he?" the queen demanded, holding out her hand. I don't know. He fell." Belena fumbled around in the folds of her gown, eventually finding Prince Argo and handed him over to her mother. Valerie took one look at the half-naked, bewildered figure in her palm and sighed deeply. "Clothes," she said, and Belena jumped up at once. She ran over to her dresser table and found Argo's clothes and handed them over as well. After verifying that everything was there, Valerie cupped her hands to her breast and walked out without a word. Belena could hear her mother's skirt swishing as she walked off down the hallway, and she knew she was in big trouble. "But he was so horrid to me. She has to understand," she said to herself. "She can't punish me because, well, what else was I supposed to do? Just let him insult me like that?" It was almost an hour before Valerie returned, looking even angrier than she did earlier. Belena couldn't face her mother's gaze, so she simply sat on the edge of her bed and hung down her head, hoping she wouldn't be chastised too harshly. The queen sat down next to her daughter and put an arm around her shoulders. "Would you like to explain to me what just happened, dear?" she asked. "And please be honest. I've already heard one side of the story, and I can't say I'm exactly pleased with your actions." Belena wanted to protest her innocence, but she knew it would do no good. Being the queen's daughter didn't make her exempt from punishment in her mother's eyes, and lying to the queen was definitely not a wise choice. So she told Valerie everything. "I know I behaved badly, Mother," she admitted after telling her story. "And I know I should be punished. I promise you, I will never forget my place again." Valerie sat silent for a few moments and then said, "Actually, the way I see it, I don't think any punishment would be necessary." "I'm sorry?" "Belena, I won't lie to you. What you did was wrong, and very much so. You forgot every rule of courtesy I taught you, only so you could have the satisfaction of teaching Prince Argo a few, admittedly well-deserved lessons. But it was a natural thing to do. I mean, if I had been in your place today, I probably would have done the same. That man needed to be brought down a peg or two, though I don't think what you did to him really changed his attitude that much. If he doesn't return with the full might of his nation's armies demanding payback for how he was treated, I'd be very, very surprised." "Mom, I'm really, really sorry." "It's all right," Valerie said reassuringly. "Don't you worry about Prince Argo from now on. I'll take care of whatever mischief he might throw at us. It's my job, remember? I wouldn't be much of a queen if I couldn't handle a spoiled, arrogant prince every now and then. All I want you to do is reflect on what happened today. The real world is seldom like the one in those stories you're so fond of. And I think what happened today was a bit of an eye-opener for you in that respect. Still, there is one thing I would like to hear from you." "What?" Belena asked as Valerie stood up and got ready to leave. "Promise me that the next time a suitor treats you in such a despicable manner, you'll come straight to me and tell me about it, instead of turning him into your personal foot slave." Belena managed to smile and nod, and satisfied, the queen turned and made for the door. But Belena interrupted her and said, "There won't be a next time." "I'm sorry? What was that?" Valerie said, stopping and turning. "I don't want another suitor, Mother. I don't want to go through all this again, 'cause it'll just end the same way. Every time." "Belena, you can't say that." "But it's true. Face it, Mom, there isn't another man anywhere who'd want to marry me." "Belena, I'm not a fool, Mom. I know that no man would ever love me as his wife. Men don't want to be small and weak compared to their wives. They want to be in charge and make all the decisions, and they could never love me because I'm just so much bigger. I'm sorry, Mom, but I don't want to listen to another nobleman from far away telling me how he can never marry an inhuman monster like me. I'd rather be alone." At this point, she succumbed to tears, and Valerie rushed to comfort her and hold her. The queen felt very sad as well. This was supposed to have been Belena's great day, but it had come to a miserable end. As she held her sobbing daughter, Valerie promised herself that she would spend as much time as possible with Belena from now on. The girl needed someone to support and guide her now more than ever, and Valerie was realistically the only one who could do that. Nothing meant more to her than her daughter's happiness. She knew that. And she would do whatever it was in her power to do, to ensure that Belena had the content and happy life she deserved. Almost a week later, and in one of the castle's endless hallways, little Marinette and her big sister Karina were walking by themselves. They were still Princess Belena's handmaidens, but their work in this capacity had been little of late. They seldom ever saw the princess, for she kept to her room, and whenever she was out, in the gardens for instance, she'd seem rather quiet, and shunned the company of her friends. The girls all knew the reason for this, and they did feel sorry for her. But they were all of the opinion that sooner or later, this melancholy behavior had to end. "She's just being a baby," Karina said as they walked. The two of them had headed back to the town to spend time with their parents and friends for a few days. "She was only rejected once, for God's sakes. That's nothing to get all worked up about." "Oh, Karina, you know Belena's different than you and me. The boys may be falling all over one another to get your attention, but to her, it must be unimaginably hard." "Oh, whatever. She's just... Oh, you're right. I don't know what I was thinking. Still, she can't stay like this. There has to be something we could... Hey, what if you and I work together? Try to get her a boyfriend. Maybe one of the boys from school. Marinette, are you listening to me?" "Shh. Did you hear that?" "No, what is it?" "Over there, by the armor. I'm sure I saw something." To their right stood a gigantic suit of armor, one of many which lined the hallway. Each of its steel boots was 30 feet long and 60 feet high, and any human who looked at it could only imagine how terrifying an army of such armored giant soldiers must have been. The two girls ran over to it and began looking around where Marinette said she'd saw something. Then they both heard a tiny clang and rushed over to the right boot's heel. "I knew I saw something," Marinette exclaimed in delight. "You want to explain what you're doing here?" Karina said in a harsh tone. "Or do you want us to call the guards?" In front of them crouched a frightened figure. It was a teenage boy, rather short and skinny, who looked as if he'd spent the day crawling about in the dust. He slowly got to his feet and didn't have the courage to look either of the girls in the eye. "Well, go on," Karina urged. "Out with it. Who are you and what are you doing in the castle?" "And how did you get in?" the sister added. "My name is Lorak," he began. Please don't tell the guards or anyone. I'll leave. I'll leave and I'll never come back." "How did you get in?" Karina asked, unmoved. There's a passage, well, more of a crack, really, in the wall. I crawled through. He began to brush the dirt off of him, and the girls looked on in distaste. Come to steal something, didn't you? Karina said. No. I would never steal anything, my lady. I just wanted to... He faltered, and they could see his face turn red in the dim light of the hallway. Yes, you were saying? I wanted to... Marinette, call the guards. Tell them we found a burglar. To see the princess! He blurted out. There was a dead silence before the girls both broke out into laughter. The boy turned even redder and regarded his own feet with intensity. Why? Karina asked, still laughing. Why do you want to see Princess Belena? This time there was no answer, but it wasn't too difficult for them to figure out why. Karina just began to laugh anew, but Marinette grabbed her by the arm and hastily pulled her aside. I think, she whispered, I think he's got a crush on Belena. Really? You don't say, little sister. He must have seen her when she visited town sometime. Yeah, I guess so. And? But don't you see? This is perfect. It is? Yes. You said we should find her boyfriend. Look who came along. What, him? Are you kidding me? Look at him, Renette. Does he look like the man of Belena's dreams? Of anyone's dreams, for that matter. He'll probably faint as soon as he sees her. But what if he doesn't? Maybe they'll like each other. You know, Belena said she didn't care how rich or famous a guy is. All right, fine. We'll introduce them. But if the princess never wants to talk to us again, I'm blaming you. They each took one of Lorik's hands and began to tug at him insistently. He wanted to leave, but Karina frightened him into obedience by listing a few completely made-up methods they used to torture intruders here. They kept on walking, with Lorik remaining sullenly silent, through the vast and thankfully empty passage that led to the bedrooms. Hey, you're the one who wanted to see the princess. So why do you want to leave? She said as he resumed his protests once they reached the door of Belena's chambers. This is your chance. Are you going to be a man and talk to her? Or would you like to see how the dungeons look like? The last thief they caught was eaten by a giant rat in the dungeons, Marinette said with a straight face. The queen caught one or two of them in traps, but there might be more. All right, I'll go, Lorik yelled. But I don't think she'll want to talk to me. Too late, Karina said to the foot of the massive door, and tugged on a rope which hung in the air. They heard a bell ringing somewhere far above, and a moment later, a voice came from the other side of the door. Who's there? Karina and Marinette, your highness, the older girl called out loudly. We've brought you a visitor. Someone who desperately desires to speak with you. Slowly, almost hesitantly, the door opened. Belena, barefoot and wearing a simple green dress, looked down at the tiny figures kneeling on the carpet. She got down on her hands and knees for a better look, and when she saw who the visitor was, she let out a sudden gasp. Lorik, she exclaimed, almost not believing what she saw. The boy looked up at her shyly, his long hair hanging over his eyes. He seemed even more frightened than when she'd met him in the forest, and he could only manage a feeble greeting of, Princess? Karina, just as bewildered as her giant friend, looked back and forth between the two of them. You've met? Was all she managed to say.